want to introduce myself. It explains it on the first slide. I'm Julie Gardner. I'm the Associate Director of Safeguarding and Social Care, and in the context of today, I'm the Professional Social Work Lead for the Trust. And I was offered an opportunity to talk to you today, and I was delighted, but also felt a bit self-indulgent that I was going to talk to you about my 40 years in local authorities and the NHS. And from what I've heard today, there's so much resonance between the sort of loneliness, isolation, but being very supported, and the mixture of emotions that you have as a social worker through those 40 years. I thought, well, actually, it's been a great opportunity for me. And so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to offer you a personal and professional perspective of what it's like to be, what it's been like for me to be a social worker for the last 40 years, working in both local authorities and the NHS. And then to weave within that the role that the Trust has had with social work and social care over that period, because I've worked between the Trust and the local authorities through that time. And then thirdly, to work with you to consider any support I can offer to you as a community, or to us as a social work community in the future. So if you want to post comments or questions as we go on, I'll try and keep up to date with those, and hopefully if I keep in any form of time, I'll have a bit of an opportunity for a conversation at the end. So next slide, please, Rachel. So I think I firstly wanted to say what a great pleasure it is to be with you all today, and I also want to say congratulations. It's Global Social Work Day, so we should all be patting ourselves on the back and congratulating ourselves for being part of this wonderful day. And I also wanted to celebrate and thank the people who've worked so hard to put this day on today. Particularly Marianne and Heather, who have inspired me and renewed my enthusiasm in having a collective of social workers across the Trust, and I hope that this is the beginning of that journey that we'll take together. Also to thank those that have contributed in making it a special day. I've listened to some of the contributions, and mostly to all of you as participants for attending. It reminded me of something that was told, that I read some time ago, that it is my experience being a social worker lies in the quality and commitment of those who practice. And today is a real celebration of that, so thank you. So next slide, please, Rachel. So when I was a child, what did I want to be? I wanted to be a police officer. When I was a child, if you didn't go past 5'2", you couldn't be a police officer, so I had to change tack. Then all I wanted to do was to go to university, as many of my friends were destined to do. My family circumstances did not support or understand that, and that's not that I didn't have a lovely family, I did, but they weren't a family that supported or understood that that I might want to go to university and continue my education. So I went to secretarial college, and I had a great time, but it was not for me, nor was I any good at it. And 40 years on, I recognise that it's a real that writing has always been a real effort for me and has impacted on my confidence. So to be a secretary and recognise that I don't write well, I was not destined to be a secretary. And technology and colleagues have helped me with that as I've moved through social work, and I'll come back to that later. But the lesson that I learned through that was when you show weakness or vulnerability, you'll always find a way to develop strength. And so I went on to do nursery nursing training, as it was called in those days, and I graduated as a nursery officer. That was not without its challenge, as I'd already done a year in further education, and the question my family asked was, why would you want to do another 2? Wouldn't you be better going out there and earning some money? And again, that was not because they weren't a lovely family, it was just that they thought that as a young female child that might be what I wanted to do before getting married and having children. Next slide, please, Rachel. So why I became a social worker. In 1986, I had an opportunity to qualify as a social worker, and this was not a university-based course, it was a further education-based course where I could do my qualification under the Certificate of Social Work whilst I was working. So I did 2 days a week in further education for 18 months, and then I had a 6 months placement with Nottingham Mind within the Nottingham Community Voluntary Service, and that's when I first entered the world of mental health. Between 1988 and 1991, I had 3 children. I just graduated from my nursery nursing, from my CSS when I returned to the nursery, and soon found out I was pregnant with my son. But I have to say, in that period, I felt a lot of discrimination and guilt. I felt guilty that they'd supported me through 2 years of social work training, and I'd returned within 3 months. I was expecting my first child. 3 months after returning from maternity leave, I found I was pregnant again, and this felt impossible. So before I returned from maternity leave with my second child, I applied and was successful in obtaining my first qualified temporary post in the Department of Psychological Medicine. It was called Deliberate Self-Harm then. It was based in the University of Hospital. But I'd had to give up a secure substantive role to do that. But at the end of that contract, I got another temporary contract in a CMHT, when, quite surprisingly to me, I became pregnant again. But they were absolutely amazing, and that was my first venture into adult mental health. In 1994, I qualified as an approved social worker. Next slide, please, Rachel. So I'd continued in temporary posts for a few years, and through this period I received really supportive and encouraging female and male manager support in terms of being flexible to bring up a young family and work in a number of flexible jobs, but they were all temporary and short-term contracts. The lesson I learned through this phase of my career was that and it's quite relevant to our lives now, I think, is that with challenge comes opportunity. This series of temporary contracts provided me with a really solid foundation of social work experience that I might not have gone elsewhere. And I returned substantively to work in 1992. And then, as I say, I gained the AMP qualification in 1994. The next significant transfer of pathway into my career was that between 1998 and 2001 I transferred into leadership and management. I became the team manager of a community mental health social work team, as they were in those days, with Nottingham City Council. This was a significant leap because I initially said no, I wasn't ready. I've always been an operationalist, I've always believed that I'm an operationalist at heart, and I'd got 3 young children. But with the support of senior managers, I was reminded that as the most senior social worker in that team at that time, I was probably doing it anyway, and I was encouraged to give it a go on a temporary basis. I did this, and then I was delighted that I got the substantive post once I applied for it, and that served as a wonderful 5 years, being part of a integrated mental health team where health and social care were fully integrated, although the social work team sat separately within the MDT. But I thought it was a really brilliant 5 years of my career working as a social worker within that integrated team, and the value and respect we had for each other's professions. I also learnt the uniqueness of a multi-professional team working openly and respectfully together. My next post was as a service manager, and this is a period when, prior to this point in my career, I'd always worked with the City Council. The City Council led on mental health provision on behalf of the City and County Councils. In 2001, it was decided that the county would take responsibility for its own mental health provision, and I was appointed to the post of service manager to bring those services back into the county council, and that would be the South County boroughs of Rushcliffe, Gedling, Broxtowe and Hucknall. This was a decision that lots of people were opposed to. It was a significant change, and it was TUPE, there was change of terms and conditions. But some of the drivers behind that change was restating and, as importantly, implementing the changes in social work priorities at that time, and those differences between the city and county that still actually exist today in terms of their citizenship, their demographics and their resources. It was a difficult and challenging job, and I think there's two things I learnt from this period. Is one that stayed with me throughout my career is that being a social worker means that you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Change comes out of discomfort, and that's not about making people uncomfortable, but feeling that discomfort and working how you can move through it to initiate positive change. The other thing I'd learnt by this stage was resilience. And by resilience, I felt that I had to be robust, but never rigid, so that I had to be able to listen to others, but to be able to see a plan through, whilst being flexible and not rigid to amend it on its way. Next slide, please, Rachel. From 2001 to 2008, I crossed the border from the local authority into the NHS. Firstly, I became an integrated service manager for the West Sector services. So that meant that as a social worker, I was privileged to manage both inpatient and community mental health provision. And that gave me a remarkable insight into the experience of staff and service users from entering the services to our most acute provision within our inpatient services. And it seemed to be a real privilege to me to be able to manage those inpatient services. I then became part of the reason that I got that job is at that time it felt that there wasn't social work visibility at a senior level, and therefore there wasn't specifically a quota system, but it was considered important that social workers and social work should be identified at senior levels. When I first got the post, I went back to my guilty feelings, as if, you know, I got it because I was who I was rather than on merit. But I spoke to a very generous candidate at the time, and I said, but I don't know what you know. And he very generously said to me, but you will know what I know, because you will be in the places where it's spoken about. You'll be in the meetings that will inform you, and you'll gain that experience. And I think having that generosity of spirit from colleagues is really important, and that helped me integrate into that West Sector service manager job. I'm just going through my notes, sorry, I'm just taking a pause. Further reorganisation, as it always does, followed, and I then took up the post of General Manager. This again was working for the NHS of County South, so that would have been all the services that were being, all the mental health services, community services, inpatient services in the south of the county. And again, that was a real opportunity for me to see how the trust operates at that senior integrated level. Again, it was a difficult decision because I had to move my pension, my terms and condition. And one of the bits of advice that I got at the time of transitioning into the NHS was, if you can do it for 2 years and you're still there, you'll do it forever. Well, I'm still here and I've never looked back. But I do have two professional cultures. I have my social work culture and my social work values, and I have got into an NHS culture with NHS values. And although most of them are very similar and often they're certainly compatible, I do think that sometimes I speak two languages, but I'm fluent now in both. But I've always, through this period, remained proud to be a social worker, but equally proud to work for the NHS. Next slide, please, Rachel. At this point, I was fairly senior in the trust, but when I looked up, I still couldn't see myself. So it was really great to have Anne-Marie Newham here today, because I think I now can see myself reflected in the board, but at this stage, I wasn't sure that I could. So I asked one of my executive colleagues what I could do about when I looked at where I would see my profession, where I would see it reflected and how it could influence the direction of the trust. And very generously again, they said to me, go and have a think about it and come with me about what you might want it to look like. And this was a lesson for me, because sometimes fate and good fortune then lends a hand. Because at that very moment, the vacancy was a half-time head of forensic social care was advertised. And along with my proposal about having a professional lead for social work at a senior level, the Nottingham City and Nottingham County Council agreed to part fund the other half of a post that would look at social care, predominantly through the lens of safeguarding, but also to be clear that the trust wanted to embrace social work and that they had a voice and an identity at a senior level. So at this point, in 2011, the Associate Director of Safeguarding and Social Care was born. Again, I nearly did not apply. I wanted to see somebody, I wanted to look up and see somebody that reflected me in the organisation. But again, with senior and supportive managers, I was encouraged to do so, and I obtained that post. It was exciting, it was scary. I entered new experiences in the Forensic Services Division. It was tricky. I had multiple roles and accountabilities. I was managed jointly, in a tripartite way. So I had 3 managers, one from the Trust, one from the City Council and one from the County Council. And so I was navigating 3 organisational cultures and languages. And it was challenging because I had to raise the profile of a social work profession and what value that added to a very large integrated health care trust. Next slide, please, Rachel. Due to spending cuts, the City and County were forced to withdraw their funding, which has led to my current role. My current role is probably 90% safeguarding, 10% professional lead. And maybe today we'll discuss whether that balance is right, and I might need to alter that again to look at what support I can offer to us as a community. But I am at the moment the named strategic leader for safeguarding across the organisation and providing professional leadership and advice to social care staff employed at all levels of Nottinghamshire healthcare. I am required to possess an up-to-date and contemporary understanding of the needs of patients, carers and staff within the varying levels of the organisation. And the post also has a corporate role responsibility for ensuring that the Trust meets standards, legislation, guidance and regulation. In 2019 I retired and returned, so now I work 3 days a week, and one of my key objectives within my appraisal is to talent manage and succession plan, and that includes talent management and succession planning, the social work identity within the Trust. So this opportunity and the work that Marianne and Heather are doing and all the trainees is really timely in that next stage of our transition as a social work community. Next slide, please, Rachel. So the highs and lows, you can't do that. Whether you're told that or you believe it, have been moments of doubt. I still sometimes think I'm an imposter. The CSS was probably, a lot of you haven't even heard of it. I felt that I hadn't done it the proper way. Tragic events and outcomes. despite all of our best efforts, and we all come to work every day to do a good job, tragic events will still happen. I remember the first suicide on my caseload. I remember the first child that, based on my evidence, was received into care. These are tragic events and outcomes for all the people that we work with and on behalf of, but also for us in terms of how we manage that and how we reflect on that and how we restore ourselves from those difficult times. My work-life balance. I did have 3 children in 3 years at the beginning of my career. There they are now. They've survived. I've survived. They would say that social work is not what I do, but who I am. I have close relationships with other professional colleagues, and they've been real highs. Doing well. I think we don't celebrate doing well enough, but when you do well individually, you get what people describe as a warm feeling that nobody else feels. And I've had a lot of warm feelings that nobody else has felt when you do a good job. And many expressions of appreciation and gratitude. Work-life balance has always been a challenge, but I am proud, and I think my children are proud. And I also would say that the offers of support and kindness to and from others has kept me grounded through these 40 years. I think kindness is the key to a lot of what we do, and taking a moment to be kind, and nothing that's more relevant probably now than ever before. Next slide, please, Rachel. Just trying to keep an eye on the time. When I tried to think, doing this presentation about inspirational people, memories and moments, I tried too hard, so I let them pop into my head, and I probably won't go through all of these, but I'll give you an example of what's touched me through my career. In the speech bubble that called me, and I'm not going to say what the patient said a nurse called her, because it's deeply offensive to me. This was a patient that was sectioned, and I was the ASW AMP that sectioned her. And when I met her, she said, but he called. She had she'd got into an altercation that meant that she needed to be restrained. And when she told me about this, she said, but he called me a. And I worked with her to have her agreement that I would call that out with the multidisciplinary team. And I have to say, this was a long while ago, when I said to the team, what really distressed her is that you called her A. They said, well, she is an A. And at that point, I was horrified. And I worked with that team to say that words have real impact. That word has a real impact on me and had a real impact on others, and we need to be careful about our language. And I was pleased to say that both the consultant at that time and the ward took that on board and thought about the way that they use language. Another one that pops up is a woman that said to me after I'd sectioned her, detained her under the Mental Health Act, I'm scared. And when asking about what she was scared about, she said that a man walked into her bedroom with a painted face and bright red lips. When I inquired about this on the ward, they said, oh, it was so-and-so, he dresses up as a clown, it's funny really. When I explained to them that it wasn't funny for her, this was a woman that had suffered non-recent sexual abuse. I think we have to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that use our services and think what things look like for them. I'm just conscious of time. I'll go through a couple of others. One of the reasons that these patients were able to describe these things to me is that when I was doing my AMP training and ASW training at that time, one of the people who had been detained under the Mental Health Act came and talked to us, and what they said to us, that you are faceless people that come into our lives, you deprive us of our liberty, and then you disappear. From that point on, I committed to never ever detaining somebody of their liberty without going to see them afterwards and having a debrief and talk to them about their experiences of that, and talk to them about the decisions that I'd made. Another one that pops into mind is the other side of social work, when we will get you, whether that's the media and the fear of whether the media will get us, whether we're threatened, and I've been threatened. And so it is the challenges of the perception of social work, but also the risks that we take every day, and being mindful that we need to be supported and protected and be cared for, both at the time that those risks emerge, but also in terms of the impact that those risks will have on us in our career. There has been 3 significant risks in my career. They will stay with me. I'm not traumatised, but they will still with me, and they shape the way that I operate today. We'll leave this slide with a bit more positivity, that there are many, many examples from my career of recovery, rehabilitation, and my favourite word of hope. Many, many. So I'll move on, Rachel, from that slide, but if anyone else wants to ask me any other questions later on what people have said. So, the balancing act, I do this for the money. I think no social worker has ever said that. But I do have hope. I am able to stay comfortable with the uncomfortable. I always recognise the privilege of my position. It is a privilege of position. It does come with its power, and I recognise that. I've hoped that I've learned that I need to take a nuanced approach to the disempowerment of individuals and speak up for them and on their behalf. And most importantly, I see every single day as an opportunity, and a good day is when I've learned something new. Next slide, please, Rachel. So, what has social work meant to me? Throughout the last 40 years, there have been one constant. Social work has always been in a state of change. That's always been constant in my 40 years. The other constant for me is the importance of human relationships with people that use our services for their families, our colleagues, and our society. Social work is a profession that I'm as passionate about today as I was when I started, but I also acknowledge it's complex and difficult work. Being a social worker has put me in a position of power and privilege, which I must always be honest about. Next slide, please, Rachel. So as we come back today, why are social workers so reluctant to celebrate their achievements? And I think from today we must continue to share our positive stories. And if I can support you in any way with that, please let me know. Next slide, please, Rachel. Thank you. And are there any questions? I know that I've run very close to time, so if there are questions that you want to ask me outside of the session, please do not hesitate to get in touch.
Just say thank you, Julie. It's been a privilege for you to hear of your professional journey today, so thank you.
Thank you all.